Hi, freshmen. How are you doing? I have this video here before our fourth nor'easter of
It's nine
March,
o'clock.
and it's 9 o'clock. This is related to our Industrial Revolution and Imperialism unit, and I'm just covering some of the honors standards by these videos, so we can do what we need to do in class since we're losing all these snow days here. So this standard is about the labor movements that began or emerged as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Now we're going to focus on the labor movements in England, which, as we remember, is where the Industrial Revolution began. And you should learn about the Industrial Revolution and labor movements in the United States next year. So you'll see some similarities and all that next year. Because it's Britain, it should probably be the labor movement with the U, O-U-R, but that's okay. So I have on the right here uh, newspapers from the past century. Uh, but know that unions and strikes, its origins really go much earlier, as earlier as the 17th and 18th centuries. Before that, people that worked were usually crafted into guilds, but by the 17th century, they began to organize into unions. And the 18th century, there's a whole new wave of disputes because of the Industrial Revolution. We already spoke in class how employees weren't given like health care, how they weren't paid well, how their conditions were dangerous, right? We read portions of The Jungle, and we just saw how awful it was to work in some of these places. So, because of that, there was a new need for people to unionize. Now, we also learned how one of the reasons it began in England is because the government stayed out of business and let business do what they had to do, which is good for the Industrial Revolution, but really bad for the workers because the government actually took steps to stop collective action, to stop unions forming. And in fact, Parliament passed the Combination Acts in 1799 and in 1800. This was during the Napoleonic Wars, so England already had a lot going on, and they wanted to make any sort of strike illegal. Like, hey, like we have people fighting, you can just go do your job. And if someone did strike, they could receive up to 3 months imprisonment or 2 months hard labor if they broke these new laws. And unions grew, that should say anyway, that's cut off despite that. In 1811 and 1812, you have a lot of Luddites protest. Now, Luddites were people who saw their careers being harmed from the Industrial Revolution. Luddites were people that didn't like machinery and technology. They made things by hand, and now they saw these machines taking away their livelihood. You see that on the news today when people say, are these Amazon robots taking away factory jobs, right? And they actually went and like destroyed some of the factories. In 1824 and 1825, Parliament eventually did repeal those combination acts. By the 1830s, unions began to increase again as the Industrial Revolution increases as well. And now these unions, instead of being locally focused, start to have nationwide aims. For all of England, we want these goals. An example of one of those unions with nationwide aims was the Grand National Consolidated Trains Union. That was formed in 1834. Robert Owens, pictured here, had a big part of that. Feel free to look up some stuff about him. And we'll get to, in a slide or two, why that union eventually did fail. We also have an example of government stepping in to prevent unions with the Tolpuddle martyrs. Here, 6 agricultural workers, and it mentions their name there on the right, made a union. And they were arrested on basically made up charges, and they were condemned to penal servitude in Australia. Many protested. This is what happened to them. As it says in the sign to the right, it became a turning point in labor laws and practices. But it did actually weaken unions because then it did scare people like, hey, we don't want to be sent to Australia. That was like the Wild West back then. Then we see another change with the 1850s and 1860s. Economic conditions are improving, so there's more flexibility for these things to happen. And this good economic condition became the foundation for a powerful trade union movement. And a lot more are established, and membership increased dramatically. In 1850s, you only have about 100,000 people in the UK in unions, but by 1874, you have about a million. So it's like grows like 10 times in just about 2 decades. Now you keep seeing these things going back and forth. By 1871, you have the Trade Union Act. And that was introduced by William Gladstone. You see him to the right, no relation to Joey Gladstone of Full House. It established the legal status of trade unions. So it said, hey, these can like be legal. It's legit. But other legislation associated with it made it difficult for unions to organize pickets and strikes. So hey, you can form a union, but doing this or that is going to be difficult for you. Right? Why is it a big deal now when certain groups strike on the news? Because there's still some difficulties. Finally, you get something known as the new unionism. A lot of the unions, as they grow and become more official and more accepted, start realizing that even the unions, though they are exclusive, they're protecting the English male worker. Maybe not people of some lower class areas of England. Definitely not women. And we all know that women were working in these factories as well. So under new unionism, you have other groups being protected by unions who were often sort of vulnerable, not being protected before. So you get the first women's trade societies beginning to emerge. You have a strike by the female workers at the Bryant and May Match Factory, which was on the East End of London in July 1888. And that highlighted the expounding boundaries of trade union activity in Britain. Now more people join unions. This is an Irish women workers union, which at this point was still part of the UK in 1888. Okay, there's a lot more we could go into. We could go into this strike at Bryant and May. We could go into the people Central Australia or anything like that. So if you have questions, make sure to ask. And I will see you next class. I hope everyone is staying safe in this snow, and help your parents shovel out. Be good.